Welcome to the Jaime Fleres Podcast, a sanctuary for soulful creatives, leaders, and heart-centered humans navigating the edges of creativity, authentic expression, and personal growth. I'm your host, Jaime Fleres, author, transformational guide, and founder of Whale Song Creative. In today's conversation, I have the pleasure and delight of speaking with Ellen Kittredge about Andean Nature Mysticism and the process of meeting our nature parents, which is a new concept for many of us Westerners, but a deeply embedded practice in the traditions of the Andean peoples of Peru and other more animistic, nature-connected cultures. Ellen is a nutritional counselor, minister of walking prayer, and practitioner of earth-based healing modalities. Ellen has studied extensively with the nature priests and mystics, known as Pacos, in the high Andes of Peru for the last 15 years. Ellen shares the medicine teachings, healing modalities, and initiatory rites that have been gifted to her with her clients all over the world. In addition to teaching workshops in person and online, Ellen maintains an active private practice where she offers mentorship in nutrition, healing modalities for the body, mind, and spirit, and shares simple land-based offering and connection practices. So Ellen, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jamie. So glad to
Yeah,
be here.
so grateful to have you here. And I was just remarking before we started that we are recording this podcast on the new moon in Libra, which to me, I have a big stellium astrologically in Libra. So I have it's a very resonant archetype for me. But I think of Libra as really the archetype of partnership and right relationship. And I know that right relationship, which is known as Ayni in the Peruvian traditions, in the Quechua traditions, is one of the core tenets of some of the work that I know that you enjoy exploring and sharing with others. Do you want to share anything about Ayni, just to kind of bring that context in as we begin to share?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's funny. I think Ayni may be a word that's going to soon actually be recognized by more people. It's amazing how some of these words from other languages come into the English language and then become something that just everybody kind of knows. Like
Yeah.
Pachamama is a word that I think a lot of people now kind of understand or relate to that as Mother Earth is technically the cosmic mother. So it's even greater than just the Mother Earth, Pachamama, but still it's something that, a lot of people know that word now. And I feel like Ayni is another one. It's spelled Ayni, but it's another Quechua word that the best translation, I think, is just sacred reciprocity. But it's really that equal exchange, the balance, of like today for you, tomorrow for me. So like the equal exchange of giving and receiving that is basically the core tenet and core principle of the Andean traditions. But it's not just something like a way that the culture structures itself. It's also comes from observing nature. So the reason that they see this as a core foundational principle to kind of live their lives by is because this is how nature organizes itself. And without this sort of equal exchange, giving and receiving, we wouldn't have, the world that we have and the level of abundance that we have, basically. So it's just really what keeps everything actually functioning. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, gosh, I want to dive into all of that. I'm going to put a pin in that for a moment because I want to
Okay.
talk about nature mysticism, but I want
Yeah,
us to get to
absolutely.
know you a little bit more first.
Mhm.
So we're going to hold that for a moment because I do want to
Okay.
come back to Ivy, but I know it'll take us down another trail.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, Ellen, share a little bit about, you do this incredible work around nutrition and nutritional counseling, nutritional healing, and a lot of this beautiful land-based work, which I know is so inspired by your work with the Pacos. Can you share a little bit about your journey of like how did you come to be passionate about these realms?
Mm.
What was your human adventure to get to these places where you're really in service in these ways?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that question, Jamie. I think in some ways I was really born into this because I was actually born into a family that when I was two, moved to a place in rural Massachusetts and basically started a homestead, which turned into a farm. And my parents were some of the first organic farmers, actually, like certified organic farmers in the East Coast. And so they were leading a movement in the 80s and 90s that was still very, like, sort of early, sort of up and coming. So I was really raised in a culture that was like very different than my peers. And I was raised to be understanding things that were like a little bit different. So I've always had this ability to kind of see outside the box, which
Um,
comes very much from my childhood.
yeah.
And so when I went to college and then after college, I was very passionate about sustainable agriculture and wanting to work in those realms. So I ended up getting a job for basically a watchdog agency in DC where we were just suing companies that were, putting on toxic sewage sludge onto land or, you know, creating GMOs and working with GMOs. And like we were basically trying to trying to keep the land healthier and trying to keep people healthier in that way too. But then I had a pretty big moment in my life when I was 25, and the guy that I had been dating for 6 months actually was diagnosed with cancer. And so that was like a really big wake up call. So I'd already been doing work that I really appreciated and loved, but it was really kind of like fighting the man. It was definitely took a lot of energy, and it was kind of, it's kind of a David and Goliath kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was just a wake up call of like, wow, life is actually short, potentially very short. And what do I really want to do with my life? And I realized like I'm actually more of a healer than a fighter. Like I have that fight in me too, but I think my deeper, expression is like a healer or a teacher.
Yeah.
So at that point, I decided that I was actually going to leave that organization, and then I started working as an assistant for a sort of like a holistic medical doctor. So I
Mhm.
had all this amazing hands-on training for the next couple of years, but I was also getting a huge amount of life skill hands-on training, basically going with my partner through the next like 2.5 years of his cancer journey. So during that time, we actually got married, and then he did pass at the end of that time. So that was a pretty big moment in my life from, 25 to 27. So I was learning a lot about holistic healing and trying to find, solutions for him at the time, which wasn't really possible because of the, intensity of what his actual diagnosis was. And it was pretty serious from the get-go, basically.
Yeah.
But I did, come out of that experience being like, wow, well, maybe I could actually help other people not have to go through this. So it was my inspiration to then get my degree as a nutrition and health coach and then begin that work, shortly after he died. So that was, yeah, that's kind of what happened in my 20s. It was definitely a big initiatory moment, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's incredible how sometimes some of the most difficult things we walk end up being what we work into medicine
Yeah,
for
yeah,
ourselves and others. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, were there any big, just thinking to open up that, were there any like, maybe you can put your finger on them now and maybe not, Ellen, but were there any big moments, like watershed moments that you remember in that time that really like something changed, like something became known to you or clear to you that kind of changed everything and you couldn't go back to the way that you had thought or felt or acted before in that period?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really just, and so he was 30 when he died,
Mm.
and I was 27, and it was just like, wow, life is short. Like potentially it's
Yeah.
very short. And he seemed like a perfectly healthy, happy person, and then suddenly he had leukemia, and it was just very quick progression, and then he had to get a bone marrow transplant, and it was just, quite an intensive process that we went through.
Um,
And I think it was just a real wake up call of like, what am I actually here to do? But
yeah.
I absolutely felt like I couldn't go back to being sort of a normal person after that. And I think I really struggled with that because there was a part of me that just wanted to kind of go back and be with my friends in their, late 20s and just like be living life. You should be living a
Yeah.
pretty happy, like carefree life in our culture, in our Western culture at that time, that you kind of had that anticipation if you were very, relatively well resourced. But I was just going through a completely different process of, basically had been shattered and like trying to put all my lost pieces back together again. So, but I think the other thing that I really took from it was, yeah, I mean, there were a few things that were going on that were resonant for me at the time. Big kind of tragedies or situations on the planet. Just really seeing other people going through suffering because I was going through it myself. So I was really feeling that very deeply in a way I hadn't before. What I realized was that if I didn't find joy again, and if I didn't find a way to like celebrate life and be fully alive, then I actually wasn't doing a good job of like honoring the memory of my husband because he was a very joyful person. He was just someone who just absolutely loved life. So
Yeah.
I really felt like there had to be a way to come through this and actually make it good medicine and make it be of benefit. And I really didn't know how to do that. It was just like there was this literally like I could see it as a tiny thread that I was trying to follow. There was like this is the potential that I can find joy again, and it
Yeah.
was just this tiny, tiny thread, but I knew that I had to keep following it. So that's kind of what kept me going for the first couple of years.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. Like this chapter of this tiny thread and also the like being shattered in that process of like coming back together again and obviously like a new structure, a new harmonic,
Mhm.
Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that journey and maybe even how Andean nature mysticism folded into that if that's relevant?
Yeah, well, Andean Nature Mysticism was something I found just a little over 3 years after he had died. So, and when I found it, it completely changed my life. And I was living in DC and I moved to Asheville, and I basically had a homecoming, and it was just sort of like, God, where have you been my whole life? Like, I've been missing this. I've been wanting to rediscover this. So it was
Yeah.
a very clear sense of I've known this work before.
Yeah.
But it was the first time I saw a despacho or a Haiwarikwi creation, which is this beautiful, basically outward expression of Ayni. So it's a way of actually working with this practice of sacred reciprocity. It was the first time I saw one of those, and I was just like, whatever that is, I have to do that. I need to do that. So I guess I was in my early 30s at that point, and then I moved to Asheville and really started studying it pretty much right away. And then it was over the process of the next few years that I feel like all of those kind of shattered and lost pieces started to come back, and I started to kind of come back into a space of more wholeness, and at this, and I was able to kind of meet that aspiration that I had of actually like finding joy and living life in a joyful way again. So it was really a profound experience. And I think because I've lived it and because I know that this is possible, I think when I teach about this work, there's a transmission that comes just from that truth because it's actually something that's resonating in my energy bubble. Like it's
Yeah.
not been easy for me. And and I found so much grace in all the things that I have met that have supported me in being able to like live life in a good way. And, like I said, be joyful and not just be like, feel sorry for myself. Because
Yeah.
I just felt like that wouldn't be the right way to honor his memory. So, yeah.
Yeah. Are you open, Ellen? I'm like curious here because I do want to get to the Andean nature mysticism, but I don't want to skip over any of this journey that you're sharing with us today, which is this beautiful arc through, through challenge, through law, through, incredible loss. Can we open up a little bit the like that thread of finding joy? Like in that moment, I imagine there was this, ongoing evolution of relationship with grief during that
Mm.
time, and you knew, you could feel, it seems like almost like your soul could knew that there was this joy on the other side. Can
Yeah.
you share anything like in that journey that feels poignant or important to your own narrative around how you walked yourself back to wholeness and through the grief and all of that?
Wow, what a big question.
Yeah, I know. Take that however you want.
How much time do we have?
I know.
Yeah.
Take your time,
Um,
whatever you want to share.
yeah, no, thank you, Jamie. Thank you. I mean, the first thing, I'll just share the first thing that comes into my mind. I think there were a lot of things that were very helpful. I mean, dear friends, good friends, people who were just so good at listening and just holding space, which I think, I really think I was given so much from so many people. And I think that, I still am trying to give back for how much I received,
Yeah, yeah.
as far as grace. But I actually, there's another part of my work that I do, which is a process of clearing energetic blocks and helping people to relieve like very deep like life traumas and significant obstacles and things like that. And I met a couple years, I guess it was probably 2.5 years after my husband had passed. I met a teacher, and she shared a story of going through a profoundly tragic event. She almost lost her life, and a dear colleague of hers, her friend, lost her life. And basically the process of putting herself back together again, which took about 7 years. And the moment I heard her story, I knew that she was my teacher because she basically said, I want to make something good of this tragedy. And I was like, that's what I want. That's what I want. And so I actually started studying with her and working with her. And then I basically did everything that she offered for the next, 7, 8 years. And then
Yeah.
I learned this technique and trained in it so that I could help other people too. So there's another aspect of my work and another aspect of my own like personal healing that came significantly through basically aligning myself with someone who had done what I wanted to do. And because I just knew, okay, this is how this I can do this too if this other person did that. So I think it was finding she's a very significant example of that, but I think there were other people as well, books I read and things were like, okay, other people have done it, so I can too. So
Yeah. Well, yeah,
yeah,
the power of the right mentor at the right time and place is such a
yeah,
gift. And then I,
yeah,
I hear you speaking to just the power of, again, we're like in the territory of Ayni, like the gifts that are so generously given to us in our time of need, whether that be a book that we're drawn to or a good friend who listens again and again and shows up with meals or with their listening ear, and just how
yeah,
powerful that can be.
yeah,
How that can also inspire us to want to give back and that spirit of reciprocity.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
beautiful. An incredible story, I'm sure. We're only touching the surface, of course.
Well, I'm just glad I'm here today and
Yeah, me
doing this.
too.
So it's definitely I didn't know where any of it was going to go. You know, I just had to kind of
Yeah,
keep showing up every day and doing the best I could, which is
yeah,
I think what you have to do when you're going through grief, you know,
yeah.
and yeah, you never know exactly how things are going to turn out and if you're
Yeah,
going to
it's
be
not a
able
linear like five steps through process either.
to.
So
Definitely
you have
not.
to follow
Yeah.
the breadcrumbs and and the and the and the non-linear, non-rational invitations of life.
Yeah, I think so. And
Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason when I found the Andean Nature Mysticism that I was very open because I had already had these experiences. I mean, I had experiences of feeling my husband, you know, from the other side and his support and stuff too.
Yeah.
So I was that it also that's another reason why I kind of couldn't go back to being sort of normal is because I actually had this experience of this love coming from another dimension
Yeah.
that I'd never experienced before. And it was real and opened me up and you know, it was it that that was just another reason I was like, okay, I can't kind of be normal because it's not
Yeah.
how it's not
Yeah.
how I'm experiencing life.
That's how life,
So,
yeah, that's not how you're designed. Yeah,
yeah.
and what a beautiful, I want to catch this through line too of, you were almost like born, you were born into this family that had this deep care for the land in a particular way,
Uh-huh.
and our food systems and how we're nurtured and nourished and this connection to land. And then I
Yeah.
love what you shared around like, yeah, you had this chapter, probably a really necessary chapter for your own soul evolution of being the fighter and realizing actually and I know you in the work that, I've done with you that I know you to be the healer. You have such this soft, like beautiful, powerful energy about you. So I see that in you as well, like that healer that came through. And then of course this initiation on top of it. And then it seems so I would love to track too this connection with land, right? Because the
Mhm.
one of the beautiful pieces that we're going to talk about today is working with our nature parents but also just working with land as a living consciousness or multiplicity of living consciousnesses. Do you want
Mm,
to share a little
yeah.
bit about that piece of Andean nature mysticism or really anything? Do you want to paint the picture of just this worldview, this way of being in the world that really resonates with you?
Yeah. Well, I think there's so many different possible avenues to go down in this conversation, but I think some of the words that really have resonated with me is this real understanding that nature is here to help us to evolve. So
Mm,
nature has a consciousness and a wisdom, and if we can actually humble ourselves to open up to that wisdom and that consciousness, then we can actually learn a few things as humans.
yeah.
But it's really that humility and understanding that, like, because we have our languages that we speak and we have our big minds and our brains and we think we can know so much and discover so much or whatever, right? But the reality is we're profoundly out of Ayni on the planet. We have, you know, wars going on. We have, you know, so much suffering, people dying. We have so much environmental, ecological destruction happening. And that wouldn't be happening if we were actually in Ayni, if we were practicing reciprocity. And so I think there's a humility that we really need as a human collective to come to. And my experience is that actually working with nature and working with land and working with the waters and opening to the possibility that these nature beings, I'm going to say, you know, put it in that sort of terminology, these nature beings that don't speak English or don't speak, you know, French or Spanish or whatever, they don't speak any language that we can hear, but that they're speaking another language that is profound and that is healing and that actually is actually healing for us in a very deep way. Like we wouldn't be alive without the waters. We wouldn't, you know, we wouldn't be alive without the food that's grown in the soil. And, you know, these are just basic things that I don't think we really deeply understand and appreciate. We can maybe understand we need water and we need food and we need shelter to survive, and that all comes from the earth, right? But there's also a level of healing that comes when we open ourselves to these powers that are much bigger than ourselves. So the collective power of the earth or of the collective waters of the earth or the wind that flows around the planet. Like these are very big forces and they have a lot of healing energy. And that's what I've learned from my teachers. And I've received a lot of, you know, really profound initiation and connection with these nature beings. And I now understand how just bringing them in for a healing session with a client can release perhaps an old trauma that they've been carrying since they were born, even, you know. So, like the power of the power of the healing power of these forces of nature is actually quite profound. But we have to humble ourselves to understand that, first of all, just even to open to that possibility. and then learn the practices of actually opening to those healing frequencies, like flowing through our bodies
Yeah.
and healing us in at the same time. And I have experiences of people sharing with me that, they feel like when I hold space for a ceremony or something, they can feel like how big the space is and how much is available and allowed in that space, or that there's just, it's hard to put it into words exactly, but there's just a big space for healing. And I can tell you that was absolutely not the case before I started doing this work. I mean, like I said, I was really shattered,
Yeah.
and it would take years and years of doing these practices and bringing back those shattered pieces, reintegrating them, and doing these practices of working with my energy bubble, which is the bubble of living energy around the physical body that we work with in the practices, and basically expanding that and harmonizing that so it can be whole and clear and open, and then a place for, basically for love to flow through, because that's actually what's going on with nature. Is nature's just pumping a huge amount of love through different ways you can see that or say that, but basically the nectar is really that frequency of love, which I think is the reason it's so healing, is because love is a high frequency vibration, and you can, a lot of healing can happen when you're in that space. So
Yeah. I know, so I'm curious, Ellen, I know, you have lived, this particularity around, you've always had this connection to the land, like through your family upbringing and all of that. But what would you say, even as, or maybe it's maybe like the clients that you see come in, because right, especially in our Western world, we don't tend to see like the water we drink in the morning as alive, as a living being that we're engaging with. Or when we go out on a walk, maybe we've got our headphones on, maybe we're just thinking of our own thoughts and we don't even really notice the other beings in the space. What are some of
yeah.
the like paradigm shifts that either you went through as you began to interface with this new paradigm or this ancient paradigm? And what do you often see are some of those key shifts that happen for your clients as they begin to interface with this paradigm of really more animism, more connectedness with the land beings, and all of that?
So one of the things that I learned early on, and had shared with me a few times when I was first studying these Andean nature mysticism practices, was just the one of the things that the Pacos, who are what are they called, they're nature priest, I think is probably, or nature mystic is probably the best translation for that. But basically they're you could call them the shamans, but they don't really use that terminology in their culture. But they're the ones who, in their culture, are harmonizing with their communities where they live, with the nature where they live, which is in pretty intense, like very high elevation. There's lots of avalanches and hailstorms and those kinds of things. So they're actually working in a very direct way to harmonize with the elements and with nature, to make
Yeah.
sure that their communities can survive and they can raise their crops and everything. But one of the things that they oftentimes said is they see a Westerner walking on the earth, and they're seeing energy. They're seeing the physical body, but they're seeing energy, of course, right? And they see that there's like this disconnect, there's a cut. It's almost like we're walking on the earth, but there's no connection to the earth. So that was something I learned early on, and I really felt that in myself as well. I think probably it took me about 2 years of doing these practices to actually start feeling anything. I basically was faking it, you know, you fake it till you make it for the first 2 years. Like, I was doing the practices, I was, showing up and doing the things I was being told to do, but because I had been through so much trauma and PTSD, I just actually was not in my body, basically. And so it took like a couple years of just showing up and doing it. And then suddenly I started like, oh my gosh, I think I'm feeling something, or I'm seeing like the energy in the field shift a little bit when I make an offering. There's somehow this like lightness that comes into the space or something like that. So
Yeah.
I started then to notice and feel, and so I really resonated with that explanation of just like being completely cut off. And then several years later, we learned about this concept of the nature parents. And the way that the story goes, that is one of my teachers, Elizabeth Jenkins, who has been, she's a Westerner, but she's been traveling to Peru and training and studying in this for like 35 years. So she's written several books and taught a lot of people, and she's really been done a great job of like bringing all of the nature practices directly to us by connecting us with the Pacos directly, so they can teach us directly. But she tells a story of how there was a couple of Pacos who were at her farm in Hawaii, and they were opening up and starting a workshop, and they started to do these healings on the people, but they just stopped and said, we can't go forward because it seems like nobody here is connected to their nature parents, And we can't do anything else until we like reconnect with our nature parents. And at that point, Elizabeth was like, nature parents? What's that? And none of us had ever heard that concept before because it wasn't something that had been like taught because the way these practices have come out, because there's a major language barrier
Yeah.
and the way that they see the world is so different than the way we see it in the West. We don't even know how to ask the questions to understand how they're perceiving. So it's been this process over many, many years of these teachings coming out in a very organic way. And so they stopped and they did this reconnection practice with the students in this workshop. And then I'm like, okay, great, now we can do the rest of it. And so then, of course, Elizabeth got curious, and then there was a huge, unfolding over the next several years about these teachings around our nature parents. And basically, the understanding is that we have a connection to the place where we're born. And the reason for that is because the earth receives us when we're born. So we are born to our human parents if they're alive, but we're also born in the land that where we're born actually has holds us and receives us as well.
Yeah.
And I know you've had a direct experience of that, so you know
Yes, I can't wait to share.
you know that that it's real,
Profound. It's
not just a
profound.
concept.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
share more about that. Like, yeah, I'd love to hear more. So we have these nature parents, right? Can you tell us more, like, what does that mean? Like, what, yeah, especially because I'm sure this concept is so new to many of our listeners.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, the way they speak about this in the Andes, the way I've learned it is that our nature parents are sort of like our godparents or co-parents. So the best like translation that they would say is like godparent or co-parent, but they actually literally see that we have four parents. We have two biological parents, we have two nature parents. It's a little more complex than that. There's actually more depth to it, but that's kind of the simplistic version. So our nature mother is usually a body of water. Not necessarily. It could be a cave, or it could actually be a body of land, or it could be like maybe like an underground area. But generally speaking, it's a body of water.
Mhm.
And our nature father is going to be a body of land, generally speaking, a mountain or a hill. In their tradition, where they're born in the mountains, and there's rivers and lagoons in the mountains. So it's always going to be a mountain and then, a river or lagoon. A lot of people, of course, are born in places that are totally flat, so they won't necessarily have a place that's, more elevated. So the best translation then would be like a park if you're born in the city, or like a wooded place in nature or something like that. But yeah, so and they hold specific frequencies that are specific to us. So they're actually a part of who we are. So we actually all do have a connection to our nature parents, but because we've forgotten it, because we've never nurtured it, that thread is almost like that very, very thin thread I was speaking of. That's,
Yeah.
I think, the thread that most people have to their nature parents is very, very thin. It exists. Our nature parents are with us, but if we don't feed it and open and nurture it and talk to that connection, then we can't bring in the love. So I couldn't, after my husband died, I felt that very thin thread of the potential for joy and hope. It took a few years of healing to open for that thread to get wider and wider, and
Yeah.
for me to actually start to perceive the love that was coming for me, from the other side of the veil. And now it's like a beam of energy that just, it's around me at all times, basically. So that's kind of what I see happen with a nature parent connection, is that people sort of open up, and we have to do it in a little bit of a titrated way, because if you went from like a very thin stream to like being fully blasted, it's actually too much for the nervous system.
Yeah.
So it's actually better to learn the practices and open gently, receive the transmission and connection, then keep coming back and then like deepening and deepening and deepening, because that expands and opens your connection and brings you deeper into that experience of really unconditional love, which is what our nature parents have for us and what they carry for us.
Yeah, I love that. And that sounds like the organic evolution of a relationship too, right? Which is that you don't go to the deepest depths that are possible between two beings right away. You get to know
Yeah.
each other and you develop a
Yeah.
relationship over time.
Hmm.
And it is in that choicefulness and that intention that we begin to grow that connection because we're engaging, we're using our will to engage with those relational fields and with those others in the
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
What was
Yeah.
it like for you to come into connection, conscious connection with your own nature parents?
It was actually a process,
Yeah.
because when we first learned the teachings, there was still a lot of lack of clarity around it. And so it really did unfold over a few years. And then
Yeah.
as more teachings came through, it became a lot more evident. And it's almost like when you're like bushwhacking, the path is obviously not clear, like you're bushwhacking, but then the people who come behind you, it's like an easy, clear path that they can walk along.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
those of us who were learning it initially, it was a little bit of bushwhacking. So I didn't really couldn't figure out how my nature parents were for, the first couple, times I tried. I was really more doing it from a kind of like a mental process rather than an energetic one. But then when I did really finally, deepen into that and then actually went and connected with my nature parents physically in person and made offerings, that was when just a huge amount of energy and information kind of showed up. And it was really, really quite profound. So I received, I mean, another part of my journey and my story is just I didn't go into nutrition counseling for my own personal health, but I have had some health issues stemming from Lyme disease when I was 10 that like set off a very low level flare in the immune system over many, many years, and then chronic stress in my 20s, and then lots of other things, exposure to mold, etc. Basically, I ended up having a flare of a significant, condition in my late 30s, which took me down for a couple of years. And I was really searching for answers. And I went to my nature parents and specifically requested for help. I basically said, listen, I work for you, Pachamama. I really want to help you, and I want to help a lot of people connect to you and help us like bring more harmony back to this world. Let's kind of try to end suffering and bring more harmony. And I know that these practices can help. I said, but I'm really in a lot of suffering right now, and I really need a solution to my problem through this. So it was like about 3 weeks later, and I discovered something that was a major linchpin in like flipping me back into being able to self heal and then kind of go through a process of being able to come back into good health. So that I do credit directly to an offering I made to my nature father. It felt to me that it was a direct response. So, and that's kind of the understanding in this tradition and the teaching is that our nature parents actually carry specific information for us that can support us in our healing on all levels. And they're actually the ones that we need to call on board to help us to heal.
Is there a special affinity, being that these are land beings, is there a special affinity with these ones in our relationship with them around physical health and healing? Is it healing on all levels, or do you find that there's a specialty with these ones in assisting us with
Mm.
on the physical level?
I think it's actually on all levels.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the reason for that is because we would almost think and understand like that most physical health stuff actually starts in the energetic field. So like the physical manifestation is the grossest manifestation,
Yep.
but usually there's trauma that's happened and it could be not not necessarily physical trauma, but even say neglect in childhood or, verbal abuse or, something like that. But there's trauma that sets into the energy field and that eventually can then present as physical health conditions.
Yeah.
So when I'm working with somebody, I am kind of looking on all levels. I'm working primarily on the physical and trying to support like reducing inflammation in the body or shifting at that level, but I'm also assessing what's going on in their nervous system and then how is that related to, to traumas or just being a sensitive being and, picking up a lot of energies and having a lot of sensitivity is something that can then manifest as physical health as well. So, but no, my experience is that the nature parents can help, on all levels. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So you've had this deep development of relationship ongoingly with your nature parents, and you all have been doing this beautiful bushwhacking work for us in the West to kind of bring
Yeah.
this medicine forward. And tell me, how do you, I know that, well, I know this, of course, and I'd love to go there because I got a chance to take your nature parents course a few years ago. Just kind of set us up a little bit about what that work is that you offer.
Yeah. Well, what's developed is just I think one of the difficulties in making the translation from the Andean peoples and their practices to the West is that we live in a completely different way and we have traumas that we have never resolved from childhood
Mhm.
that we live with and that kind of pile up over a lifetime. And they don't have that. And the reason for that is because when something happens to a child in that culture, they immediately bring the energy back from that soul loss or that bubble. They would call it a bubble loss. But basically, any trauma that is experienced, they're immediately integrating it back in with the help of nature. And
Yeah.
so we're in the West, we're very, very fragmented in comparison. This is why they're so happy. I mean, literally, like they live with very few resources, material resources, but they're just happy and joyful and they just have this way of being that's just you go and you spend time with these people and you're just like, my God, figured it out, you know? Like, and it's just not about material resources.
Yeah.
It's about something else completely because they're actually drinking in the nature nectars of nature at all times because they have that level of depth of relationship. So what we've kind of realized is that it's really important to do the somatic work and to the support in the West, support people in actually being able to integrate these practices. So the way I teach the Nature Parents course is with my colleague Cynthia Berg, who offers this somatic respiratory integration process, which is hands-on working with the breath and supporting, you know, basically shifts and healing in the nervous system. And that really helps to create the container for the physical body and the nervous system to be able to receive that transmission. So again, we don't want to open the hose valve like too wide. We have to titrate it. But all the Andean practices are about opening your bubble and receiving more nectar into the system. They're also very good practices to release trauma and to release heavy energy and stuff too. So that is part of the practices. But in the West, it seems like we need this additional kind of somatic approach and support. So that's the way that I teach this course is a 6-week course with my colleague Cynthia, and we kind of pair these two things together. So working with the nervous system and supporting that somatic integration and healing, and then bringing in basically unconditional love in different sort of frequencies or vibrations of that, you could say, different flavors of that, and supporting like harmonization in the energy bubble, which then once you have that harmonization in the energy bubble, it can really shift a lot of stuff, physically as well. So
Yeah. Well, it's an incredible program. I highly recommend it. I had the experience of being in that and in your program. I think it was last year or the year before. I can't remember. Do you have any
it
recollection?
was
Time is funny for
it
me.
was it was after the hurricane, I
It was
think,
after the
Jamie.
hurricane.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So if you don't mind, I'd love to share a little bit
yeah,
also to just
absolutely.
help our listeners kind of see what this actually looks like in practice. So yeah, I had joined the program. I've always had a very deep connection with nature, some of which was conscious, some of it was not conscious or, well articulated, but I've always had this deep connection with nature. I actually have spent a good deal of time. I lived in Peru, so I have some connection to that land as well.
Mm,
But after the hurricane, I spend a lot of time in nature. I spend a lot of time with the communities, the natural communities in my region.
mm,
And, the Hurricane Helene really came through and really rocked us. And for me, it was really not only, of course, the suffering of the humans that live in this region, but I felt the nature here really deeply. And it was a time of like acute grief for me to just kind of navigate what it meant to be on this land at this time with the way that things had unfolded. And I felt really attracted to the nature parents work. I'd done some Andean nature mysticism work in the past. I've sat with despacho, which you had mentioned earlier, through my Koya practice. So I've had some interface with some of these beautiful practices, and it almost felt like I was getting a call from my nature parents, like, "Hey, we've got you. We can help you. Come
mm,
and come and enjoy. Immerse yourself in this practice, in this process of helping you remember." It was it was one of the most profound experiences I've had, this
mm,
this work of coming into conscious contact with my nature parents.
mm,
So for me, and I'd love to share a little bit of this story just because it's one of my favorite stories too to tell. So I grew up in a place called Walnut Creek in California at the foothills of a mountain called Mount Diablo. I knew right as we began to work that my nature father was this mountain because I'd lived at the foothills of this mountain. And for so long, this mountain is called Mount Diablo, which means the devil's mountain. And so for so long, I had a really tough childhood and time living on that land. And I always was like, of course I live at the shadow of the devil's mountain. Like it's the devil, like just this dark, heavy energy was sort of how I'd interface with the name this of my nature father. So when we started to do this work, I was like, okay, so I had this idea of this like devil's mountain, like kind of lived in my, we coexisted in my childhood. And I always went to that land. One of the ways that I really coped with early challenge in my life was that I would go to the land. Like I would just take the longest walk I could take up in
mm,
those mountains. So I spent a lot of time in those mountains as a young person. And it was like I knew intuitively to go to my nature father, but I didn't know I was going to my nature father. I just knew that I was going to where I knew I could find respite and solace and comfort. And so when I began to look into Mount Diablo, I learned some history of that land. And what I learned was that it was called Mount Diablo because the original people actually felt they worked with this mountain as a very sacred land. And they had specific ways of working with this body of the earth. And so when the Spanish came and wanted to kind of take this land for themselves, they experienced some really strange phenomenon on that mountain. So when they would rush after, these native people to kind of capture them, strange things would happen, things that kind of spooked the Spanish.
Mm.
And it scared them. They thought that the mountain was, possessed in some way or had the devil in it. But actually, it was nature spirits that were doing this really beautiful protective work of the indigenous people there. So this story in itself, like, just unlocked something for me where, so the original name of this mountain is Tuishtak, which is really, and I won't do a perfect translation here, but it's almost like this origin, this cradle of
Mm.
birthplace of the sacred. And I was like,
Mm.
what a different name for this land. And so the transmission for me with my nature father it happened on so many levels. One was just this unlocking of this incredible story of the power and the magic and the protection of land beings being
Mhm.
one. Two, how this quality that sometimes happens in us where we're misperceived or misnamed or mislabeled, that we
Mm.
might be called something like the devil for so
Mhm.
long when actually our truer origin is one of beauty and sacredness. And so there was something in there for me around the travails that I'd experienced living on that land where I felt misinterpreted or mislabeled or misunderstood. And I was like, wow,
Mm.
I was living with this nature father who knows what that's like, who knows what it's like to be misnamed, to be called the devil when in fact it's this most sacred land. And there was
Mm.
some beautiful transmission for me in that of,
Mm.
I can be with being misunderstood or judged. Like, my nature father knows that too. There's like this bigger field that's now holding that with me, and I'm not alone. And then I also realized that, and this was obviously with my nature mother, which I'll talk about in a minute, was that I realized, growing up in a challenging circumstance, I often felt really alone, like I wasn't really cared for or provided for in a certain way. And
Mhm.
coming back into contact with my nature father and mother, it was as if I went back through my whole story and I was like, wow, I had this secure connection that I thought was absent, but it was actually always present. And it was with the nature. It was with the nature beings, these ones that were with me my whole childhood.
Yeah.
They never let me go.
Yeah.
And so being able to be in conscious relationship with them, I could hear, we could never rescue you or, fundamentally change your life trajectory because it was yours to take. But we were always there. We were
Yeah.
always with you. We were always witnessing. We were always holding with you. And even now I could cry because having that awareness that I was always loved, that I was always held, that I was always cared for, even when maybe the human world couldn't provide that, it
Yeah.
stitched something back into my biography that was fundamentally a new way of me understanding my life. And then the other piece, so my nature mother, I was born in John Muir Hospital, which I love because I have so much respect and admiration for the work of
Mhm.
John Muir. And that hospital, it's funny, it's a hospital and a park and a church. They were all in this little area, and the church was my church growing up, and the park was where I used to spend all my days playing, and the hospital was where I was born, and they all sit on top of a sulfur spring. And so it's this underground water system that's like not necessarily seen above water, right? We live in, it was a little bit of a drier place, so we didn't have lots of bodies of water everywhere, but there was this underground sulfur spring. And so as I got to know what sulfur, the power of sulfur from like mineral perspective, it's one of the most powerful agents of transformation, like in stone medicine. So I have
Mhm.
this like underground nature mother who is not seen, but she's smelled. She's also kind of interfaced with in an interesting way there because it smells like eggs in that area. So people are always like, oh, but I'm like, actually, there's like deep transformation under the ground there. And so I was able to work with her as this deep, unseen, transformative power, this like
Mm.
really beautiful, like she does her work in the deep where it's unseen and out of sight, but her work is really powerful too, and she helps with this profound transformation. Something
Mm.
about having these two allies, particularly at a moment where I was experiencing a lot of crisis in my environment, they have become allies that I've been able to work with and relate with ever since. I have a picture of the mountain like at my altar, and I work with them, I call them in, I
Mhm.
ask them for help. And I haven't yet come back to do a pilgrimage to them because I live in Nashville now. I live on the East Coast, but I look forward to that time where I can meet them again in that full consciousness and be able
Mm,
to actually be in physical space again and make those offerings and really share my gratitude for what they've always provided
yeah.
for this body, for this life.
Jamie, that's such a beautiful story. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think so. And I think, I mean, there's so many things that you spoke to that I just love to kind of reflect. It just,
Yeah, thanks.
like what you mentioned about like stitching your biography back together. And most of us have some level of trauma from our childhood or some experience that we weren't loved perfectly by our parents. I mean, probably everybody almost, has
Yeah.
that experience. And I think to to come back into that realization and understanding that these other bodies, these other parents actually have loved you unconditionally and been with you the whole time, it actually literally it adjusts, it shifts something very foundational and very fundamental. And
Yeah.
it can actually allow you to have a completely different perspective of your life and how you can walk through life. So it's really amazing. I feel like it can turn people, can shift sometimes from more like a victim place into like, victim to victor or whatever you want to say that. But you're making that translation because you realize, wait a second, I wasn't just the victim of like experiences that I had no control over because I was a small being and my parents did this or that, or there was this difficult, whatever it was. So it actually completely shifts that and that realigns. And when that shifts, then that has profound change that happens on the physical, energetic level. I mean, it can change so, so much. So I do think it's really, really helpful, especially if there has been trauma or if there's not a great relationship with one's parents, or even if there was a great relationship, but there's still some things that are unresolved,
Yeah.
it can make a really, really big difference. Because the way my teachers would say it, it's like we're all children of Pachamama. We're all children of the earth, and she's a great mother, and she's the one who loves us and holds us, and she's ultimately responsible for us. So our parents take this incredible responsibility of taking care of us, but they're not actually ultimately in charge. Pachamama's the one who's really holding us. Our bodies are made out of her, where they're structured from her. So when we realize that, when we make that shift, it can really shift a lot of things in one's psyche. So,
Yeah.
and I really also love what you said about how it was maybe your nature parents talking to you, because
Yes.
that's what I find too. People come to me and they're like, "Well, I don't know, this happened and that happened." I was like, "Well, generally what happens is when you're ready, your nature parents start to talk to you."
Oh, yeah.
So I really do recommend people just listen to that, and because
Yeah.
it's not going to be a conversation that's happening in English. It's going to be subtle nudges. It's going to be feelings. It's going to be experiences. But then stepping into that connection and actually saying yes, saying, I am ready to now to bring in more love, to bring in more healing. That's really what they're saying. There's like a blessing field that is there, and they've been offering it the whole time.
Yeah.
And we're just the ones who we just take a little while as humans to kind of like
Turn.
realize. So
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's really incredible, especially because we live in this time, right? You spoke to like the ecological destruction and just a lot of the pressures. I think some of us have this narrative that, nature or Pachamama or Gaia is like somehow angry with us and we're being punished. And I
yeah.
personally, I understand consequence is a layer of that, but I also do just hold that deep belief in my experience. My experience would validate this. She actually holds this incredibly unconditionally loving field for us and always has and always will. And it's really a matter of us turning back toward it so that we
Yeah.
can receive that again to allow it in.
Yeah. I think that's true, Jamie, and that's a really profound shift to have too. And
Um,
what the Pacos would say is that, the challenges that we have, the destruction that's happening and all that kind of stuff, it's really coming from humans. It's coming from our imbalances. And they actually have a word, they call it, there's something called the Nyausa Waira, which is a blind wind that flows around the planet. And it's fed by fear and it's fed by, like difficulty and stuff. So when there's sort of negative energies, if you want to call them, or heavy energies that are created because of trauma or whatever else, then
yeah.
that can kind of like feed into that. And so then that blind wind goes around the planet, and then it kind of is attracted, like is attracted to like. And so people may then, pick up on that, or maybe they're picking up on that things are difficult or heavy, or there's a lot of crisis happening on the planet, and you're feeling that and you're bogged down by that. But that's actually just the part in us that is resonating with that blind wind. which is created by basically humans being out of Ayni, So I think it's really important to understand that a lot of what we see is actually human created, and that the earth is always trying to kind of bring back balance and bring ourselves back into like homeostasis. So
Yeah.
there are big things that happen like volcanoes and earthquakes and hurricanes that are just, very destructive, but there is also like a rebalancing that is needed, as part of that.
Yeah.
So, and I think one of the things that I really love about this tradition, because it really inspires one to actually like basically try to be as good a person as possible, which I think is a really good way to live life.
Yeah.
But basically, we learn about like how we can be stewards and how we can use our potential in a positive way to give back. And that because a lot of times there's a negativity that we can have as humans as well. To, well, we're all bad and we're all evil and we should just all die or something, and then the world would be a better place. And it's like, no, humans do have a place. We've collectively gotten out of balance,
Mhm.
but individually, we all have this beautiful spirit that's actually trying to find harmony and healing and
Yeah.
love and connection and everything. And these traditions teach us, like, remind us how we can do that and help us to step into that. And then we can become a powerful force for good and for benefit and for bringing benefit to others rather than feeling guilty or shameful about, how we as a collective humanity have messed things up so much. So it's just very empowering and very positive in that way too, which I think is a real needed medicine right now.
It is, yeah. And I love what you spoke to. I think of it as like shame, like that idea that like we should all die and like we should just be purged from this earth because we've done
Mhm.
wrong, which again, we could probably go down a rabbit hole about like the conditioning of Christianity, you know, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
different ways that view or paradigm has kind of infiltrated our consciousness. But I notice even just from a psychological perspective that shame tends to shut down connection. Like when we feel
Mhm.
shame, we sort of close in on ourselves. We almost like furl, like as rather than
Yeah,
unfurling,
yeah,
like fern, we actually fold in on ourselves, and it's very hard to be in connection of any kind when we're in that shame. And so there's this unfurling that can happen when we can begin to open up toward the medicine and another paradigm, right, which is that we actually are fundamentally seeking that harmony with all of life, and that we are here
yeah,
with gifts and medicine, and we have medicine all around us that is
yeah.
here, that loves us and wants to support us, these beings that we can work with. I wonder for those listening, Ellen, I definitely would recommend wholeheartedly, as you as you can imagine, the parents course. So please, we'll talk about that in a moment and how people can get connected with that. But thinking about other people who maybe it's not the right time of the year for them to jump into that program. What are some ways, maybe a couple just practices, like just to bring, because we have these beautiful ideas that we brought into the field together today. For those
Mhm.
of us who are maybe curious or a little hungry for this kind of way of being with the world, what are some really simple ways that either you or you suggest for your clients, ways that people can begin to incorporate some simple practices into their
Mhm.
lifestyle that help
Yeah.
enrich their connection with nature and the natural world?
Such a good question. I think so. I think the first thing is just to like put aside any like sense of like that this is somehow weird or whatever, and
Yeah,
just think,
yeah,
okay, this is actually a natural thing. We're supposed to be connecting this way,
yeah.
and really open to the possibility of the connection with nature just being like any other conversation that you'd have with a good friend. And so this is the way I really like to kind of share about it and think about it. Like if we're going over to a friend's house for dinner, say a new friend, maybe we just met them once and we're like excited about the friendship that might develop, and they've invited for dinner. Okay, this is great. We're going to get to connect more. What are you going to do? You're probably going to bring like a bottle of wine or maybe a nice salad or dessert or something, right? You're going to bring something to your friend's house because you want to get to know them because you're excited about this connection. So we can think about our connection to nature in the same way as we want to actually offer something physical. In this tradition, it's not just like mental imaging or thinking about it stuff. There's action, there's activity that we are offering. So the simple practice of taking like a flower, from your garden that you're picking or something, and maybe there's a stream that's nearby or runs through your backyard or garden, or maybe there's a beautiful big tree in the forest that you really feel a connection with. But just basically taking something that is an offering from nature that has some beauty or some resonance for you and bringing it to that nature being, that stream or that tree or that hill or whatever it is, and just introducing yourself and saying, "Hi, my name is," and I would like to get to know you better. I would like to open this connection. I would like to, assume that this is like a friendship that can develop. And then you just offer your breath into that and could speak more about that if we had more time. But there's ways of, carrying certain prayers with the breath that are specific to the transmission, that the nectar that we can carry as human beings. And then just do it every day or do it on a regular basis for a period of time. And then just notice what happens. Because what's going to happen is just like any other friendship, there's going to be this development, there's going to be this deepening. Like you mentioned, relationship, you don't go all in, but you show up and you keep making little offerings and you keep, asking for a connection and, those kinds of things. And it makes a profound difference. I mean, if we have a couple of minutes left, I just
Yeah.
want to share like the thing that's been the most, like, truly one of the most powerful experiences of this for me is looking back to, so 6 years ago, I moved to England. I had met my husband this summer before, my then future husband. Then we got married,
Right.
moved to England right before the pandemic. And then I knew because of these practices that I wanted to ask for a local body of water and a local body of land to be my adopted nature parents. Because what you can do is you can make relationship where you live with nature beings that you're going to say, hey, could you kind of act as my adopted parents for this period? Because I'm not living near my actual birth sort of nature parents.
Yeah.
And so I made an offering to this river that flows through the village where I live called the River Medway, and asked her to be my nature mother, my local nature mother, and to basically help me and be a guide and be a support for me in my work here and my life here. I made the offering, and then I was sort of guided to go a little further down the stream and go into the stream, and there was a rock that was there that was gifted to me. But the place where I went in, there was a huge amount of trash in the stream. And I picked up this rock, and it looked like the head of a dragon.
Mm.
And I just had this experience in that moment of seeing that the body of water, the River Medway, was like a dragon, but it was like a dragon that had this like so much trash in it that like the dragon was being like held down, so it couldn't flow freely. And in that moment, I knew that I had to arrange a litter pickup, and that was the Ayni. She was like, I'll be your nature mother, but it said to me was, I need to be seen for who I really am. So it was like the trash in the stream, in the river, was meaning that people couldn't really see her beauty. So I didn't know very many people. I was new here. I was actually in the chronic illness that I mentioned before. I was in the manifestation of it at that time. So I was just like, it was complete stretch. I mean, it was absolutely a big ask for me. But I was just like, but this is the Ayni. This is what she asked.
Yeah.
So coming up on 6 years later, the amount of positive work and benefit that has come from this connection. There was a group that was founded called Friends of the River Medway 5 years ago. We've done so much work to clean up the stream. There's all of this like testing that's going on for testing for pollution coming in. All of the tributaries to the stream, we're working on that. We did a pilgrimage last summer where we walked like the whole length of the river from the source to the sea, 9 days. People had just absolutely life-changing experiences. And basically, she's being seen for who she is and she's being remembered.
Oh,
So,
I have
yeah,
full chills and so much joy to hear
yeah,
this. That's the incredible thing too, when we come back into these relationships, they're so inspiring and so nourishing. I mean, I
yeah.
think of even like animal encounters. Like if you ask, I actually did this in a group once. I asked each person as an icebreaker to just share their most recent animal encounter and to watch people come alive. Like there's so
Mm,
much joy. I
yeah,
even thinking like, yes, there was work, right? There was cleanup, there was this big hurdle that you maybe had to meet to even make this ask and begin this process. And then just
hmm,
the incredible joy and satisfaction and deep meaning that comes from actually stewarding and
yeah,
caring for and tending and then receiving so much back. I mean,
yeah,
that is really the
yeah,
gift of nature, is this incredible reciprocity that we've been speaking of
yeah,
all
yeah,
hour,
yeah,
to really come back into that feels good in a way that's different than like a quick dopamine hit or
yeah.
like this deeply nourishing
Yeah, it's like
thing.
it's long-term nourishing. It's not like a just the one thing and then it's gone. It's like it's actually there and it's consistent and
Yeah.
yeah. But it's my best. It's really probably Possibly, and I've had a lot of powerful experiences with a lot of nature beings in the past 15
Yeah,
years doing this work, but
yeah,
it's possibly the most dramatic one for me that's still being lived into as all of this unfolds about the power of just making a simple offering and saying, I'd like to get to know you, local stream or local mountain or, whatever it is, wherever it is that you feel called to, because you never know what might unfold from that. And I think this is how we bring more harmony back and how we can support, shifting some of the things that are so dramatically out of balance right now is bringing people back to like walking silently by a river for 9 days. There's nothing like it. It
yeah,
will shift your whole experience of reality and life and shift how you want to be in the world. And that's a very positive thing, I think.
yeah. And a medicine that I would argue a lot of us are really hungry for, even if we don't even really know it.
Very hungry for. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Ellen, it's been such a pleasure to have you here. Where can people find you? Like, share with us a little bit about the work you do in the world, just so we have real good clarity about that. And yeah,
Mm.
how can people stay with you, stay in connection with you, receive some of your medicine? Yeah, what do you?
Well, let's see. So I've been doing the work of like nutritional counseling and coaching for about 17 years now. And one of the big things I do is offering seasonal cleanses, which I offer 3 times a year. So that's always something people can jump in for. And my nature mother is actually an estuary. So she actually cleanses as the water comes in and out. There's a lot of cleansing action in estuaries. So I think that might be part of the reason. When
Yes.
I met her, I was like, oh my God, I understand why I work with cleansing and detoxification so much.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of what I do professionally. The other thing in my nutritional world that I've really focused on the last like 3.5 years, partly because it was a big part of what helped me to kind of pull out of my chronic health issue is working to support the gut biome and gut health and healing at that level. So I'm totally fascinated and geek out on that, all the time, do a lot of testing and really support people and, supporting basically like you can think of the gut as like the soil. So if we go back to like agriculture and the land and where I grew up farming, it's kind of doing the same thing as working with the inner soil in the body to create health from the ground up, really. And then the nature parent work I do, yeah, was with my colleague Cynthia. And usually at this point, I think we're just offering these 6-week programs just once a year. I do also do private mentoring in this work as well, but I really recommend folks do start with the nature parent course because it's the foundational stuff to then be ready to kind of go deeper with the nature practices.
Yeah.
The other thing I mentioned was the energetic healing and that kind of support. So that's another piece that oftentimes I just bring it in with my private clients who I'm already working with. If they're stuck or there's something that's going on for them, like obstacle they can't quite move past, then we do some of these clearing sessions and it oftentimes shifts the field pretty quickly so then they can, have greater success. So I combine all three of these things with some of my clients, and some of my clients I'm just working with just nutrition or just working with the nature practices. So it really just depends on the individual. But my website is just my name.com, so ellenkittredge.com. And then the nature parents work is on my colleague Cynthia's website. So I assume you'll probably
The
put that in
link.
the
Yeah,
show
we're going to put
notes.
both of those links in the show
Yeah.
notes so you can find
Yeah.
them below.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say I have been through Ellen's cleanse. I think I went through a winter cleanse maybe with you. I can't remember, but it was phenomenal. It was I had it was I did it at the recommendation of a friend, and I'm so glad I did. It was really wonderful. And I do know, many people who've worked with you with the microbiome work that you do, and I've done just a little bit of that with you, and that's profound work too. So anybody who's listening who's like, I think that's for me, I definitely recommend reaching out to Ellen. And, for those of you who are listening around the time that we're offering this, there is an upcoming program. So we're recording this in on the 1st of April. And so the 26th, I think, is when you begin. So just a couple weeks. So if you're listening to this right when it comes out, there is an offering of the Nature Parents course upcoming. I highly recommend it. Again, the links are in the show notes. And otherwise, I also just highly recommend that you connect with Ellen and stay apprised of her work because she's always offering so much medicine through her newsletters and her programs, and it's just a really lovely person to stay connected with. So I highly recommend that. Everyone listening. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
Anything else you want to
you.
share before we close? Yeah, you're so welcome.
I think just real gratitude for being able to have this conversation. Thank you for reaching out and asking me. And I hope I did a little prayer before we got on, just that this may be received as good medicine for whoever is ready for that. And I think, as I mentioned it earlier on, I think I really received so much grace in my life when I was in a really tough time. And my desire, my hope, is to be that person for other people now because I've kind of come through that, and now I am in a place where I can really offer that abundance. So I guess just, yeah, hoping that if you're feeling like you're in a tough place and need some support, and know that the grace is out there, and largely through, for me, the connection with nature is so much of how that's been supported for me. But then I can be kind of like the translator for that. That's my hope. So.
Yeah. Oh, Ellen, just so much gratitude for the who you are and how you walk in the world. Truly, truly. Yes. So
Thank
until we
you.
meet again. Yes, and
Till we
everyone
meet
else.
again.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And for everyone who's listening, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Jaime Fleres podcast. If you love the episode, please share it with a friend so these conversations can continue to spread and support others. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And of course, your reviews are really appreciated. If you want to reach out, or if you want to check out Ellen's work or have any questions about working with her or I, just reach out. All of the links are in our show notes or in the description. And again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to connecting with you again.